Thank you to the Southwest Harbor Library for helping put on this production of the Mills of Mount Desert Island and being so supportive of the history of our island. I'm giving this talk and dedicating it to Ruth Mitchell, who is a many-generation island gal and who is so proud of the accomplishments of her ancestors and all those other island residents for whom their ancestors were the early pioneers that helped develop Mount Desert Island to become what it is today. Battle of the Plains of Abraham, Quebec, September 13, 1759, between the French and British. Starting in the 1600s, two countries, France and Britain, laid claim to the same territory spanning the Maine coast. After 150 years of battle on the Plains of Abraham in Quebec City, we've finally decided the outcome. And since I'm speaking English, we all know how that went down. Not so great for the French. And with the resolution of war, the Maine frontier finally became open for settlement by families arriving from colonial Massachusetts. It's Ruth Moore's fault. With her stories of island life long before tourism and rusticators hit the scene. For inspiring in me this fascination for the pioneers of the emerging frontier in Down East Maine. Her novels, with vivid depictions of people who overcame the adversities of a rugged and sometimes harsh environment, have drawn my admiration for their impressive resilience and determination to thrive. How does an individual find the physical and mental strength to survive and then prosper in a wilderness? What were the resources necessary to help settlers get on their feet and develop successful local economies? The foremost necessity was energy. In this case, water power made the difference between survival or failure for these families. Fortunately, for those curious today, these island people, ancestors of many local families, kept detailed town records, ship logs, store accounts, deeds, diaries, letters, and much more that give us a window into their lives. Mills of Mount Desert Island, water power, and alternative energy. Starting with the first colonial settlements in 1761, free, renewable water power energy launched the Mills of Mount Desert Island and allowed settlers to thrive. Now, I can't possibly go through the 30 mills that I learned about in detail in one talk. I'll try to talk fast and share with you a general overview to give you a sense of the important role that mills played. So sit back, enjoy the photos. Here we have Lynham Mill, Schooner Head Road, Bar Harbor. We begin our story of the frontier settlement of Mount Desert Island with this man, Francis Bernard, the ultimate real estate developer, Royal Colonial Governor of Massachusetts. In 1761, Bernard obtained a royal land grant of Mount Desert Island in lieu of payment for his services as governor. He devised elaborate settlement plans for his fiefdom that included 3 mills. Bernard designed a subdivision in Southwest Harbor, built spec houses, and the first mills to promote settlement. Bernard enlisted the services of surveyor Nathan Jones to build sawmills on the island, including a tide mill at Bass Harbor. The Revolutionary War put an end to those real estate plans. Why did Francis Bernard focus on building mills? Mills would provide his settlers the basic necessities for survival: food, clothing, and shelter. James Richardson Mill, Richardson Brook Outlet, East Side Somes Sound. Food. The grist mill allowed settlers to process their grains for consumption. The bottom stone was stationary. Sitting slightly above, the top stone was concave with an eye in the center for the axle gear, where the grain was poured and channeled into grooves radiating from the center. This is Somesville, Somes Brook, behind the old Higgins store on the road leading to the cemetery. Clothing. The carding and fulling mill prepared wool for clothing. The bark mill extracted tannins necessary for tanning leather for shoe and boot manufacturing. The wool mill was improved to include dyeing and weaving. Lyman Somes, as overseer of the port, used the building to house transients. Fun fact, the upper floor was used for dance classes too. The wool mill, Somesville, 1850, near the Brookside Cemetery. Shelter and transportation. The sawmill cut the timber for house construction, shipbuilding, used in transportation of the people and their goods, container fabrication, such as barrel making that allowed settlers to hold their products for transport and storage. James Richardson House, circa 1762, East Side Somes Sound. Somesville, Shipyard. Barrel, Great Cranberry Island. Many mill sites had shipyards nearby. From 1810 to 1819, 20 ships were built. From 1820 to 1829, 84 ships were built on the island. Shipbuilding and sailing was the biggest industry around MDI. Eben Hamer. Mills provided the lumber to build those ships. One of the 5 shipyards in Somesville. Somes Mill Yard. Utilizing water power to turn machinery required harnessing the water with dams. Remnants of Tidal Mill Dam at Goose Marsh Pond in Pretty Marsh. Mill dams regulated the outflow of water and created ponds that held the logs being sent along to the mill. Mill Pond at Seal Cove Stream for the Heath Sawmill. Dams altered and shaped the landscape. Just think of the creation of the Great Meadow Lake. Great Meadow Flood of 2023 from a dammed culvert. When examining old maps for clues about mills, a hallmark of a mill's site is the exaggerated swelling of stream beds formed by dams. Shingle Mill on Ripples Pond, constructed by Abraham Somes III, last run by Edward Somes. The nucleus and predictor of village development was the mill. Corn mill and sawmill, Somesville, 1795, John Peters map. On the 1795 John Peters map, there is already located 11 mills. Starting out at the top is Sawmill 1, Northeast Creek Outlet, de Gregoire and William Blunt, 2 tide mills. Number 2, Stony Heath, near the Hamilton Pond, Eben Higgins. Number 3 is in Hall's Cove. Samuel Hall started the sawmill there and then was carried on by Edward Brewer. Number 4, Duck Brook, originally started by Captain Ezra Young, then carried on by Thomas Wascott, and then finally Edward Brewer. Number 5, Cromwell Harbor. Nathan Jones made the first sawmill there. Then it was carried on by James Hamer. 6, Schooner Head, William Lynham. Number 7, Wascott Cove. Hadlock Brook was first started by Samuel Hadlock. When he died, James Richardson Jr. took over that and then Samuel Gilpatrick. Number 8, Richardson Brook, James Richardson Sr. Number 9, Somesville, Somes family. Number 10, Echo Lake Outlet, run by Job Denning. Number 11, Seal Cove Stream Outlet. Abraham Reed built the first sawmill there in 1785 and then sold it to William Heath. An explosion of mills. 1887, map, Colby and Stewart. Between 1761 and 1900, small water power mills were abundant and integral to the local economy. They changed owners over the decades. That is 28 green dots. The means to wealth was the sawmill, and with it, the ability to construct ships to transport products. One of the first of Bernard's settlers on Mount Desert Island, Abraham Somes and Hannah Herrick Somes. Somes was a cooper or barrel maker from Gloucester. In 1761, he built his homestead near Oak Hill for the oak trees used in making barrel staves. Abraham Somes sawmill was erected in 1763, burned on July 4, 1933, when a couple of Somes teens set off holiday fireworks. This was initially operated with a single sash blade, 500 board feet per day. It was replaced by a gang sash with multiple blades and improvements to produce 5,000 feet of board per day. The Somesville Mills, starting at number 1, Kittredge Brook. Benjamin and Edwin Kittredge and Samuel Reed had a sawmill here, Short Lumber. Number 2, Babson Creek, owned by George Hudson, who's a bark mill for tanning. Number 3, on Somes Stream is the Somes Grist Mill. Number 4, nearby, is Somes Stream, Somes Woolen Mill. Number 5 is the Somes Stream outlet into Somes Harbor, the Somes Lumber Mill. Number 6, Ripples Pond Stream, Ed Somes Shingle Mill. By 1763, just 2 years after Somes' arrival in Somesville, there was a sawmill, a shingle mill, a lath mill, and a grist mill. By 1791, a most profitable woolen mill, a tan yard, a bark mill for tanning, 2 shipyards were added. By 1870, there had been added a stave mill and 5 shipyards. To the woolen mill was added a fulling mill and a dye shop. Remains of the old Somes Dam on Ripples Brook for a shingle mill run by various Somes family members and last run by Ed Somes. The influential Richardson families, another of Bernard's early settlers, 1762, neighbors of Abraham Somes in Gloucester. James Richardson, first plantation clerk of Mount Desert Island, 1776, and clerk of the Congregational Church. Stephen Richardson Jr., first meeting of the plantation of Mount Desert Island, held at his house on Crockett Point, Bass Harbor, 1776, representative to the General Court of Massachusetts. Thomas Richardson, first member of Committee of Correspondence and first selectman. These 3 brothers were highly educated and important members of the community. Now, their parents were Stephen Richardson and Jane Montgomery. Stephen Richardson was the gardener for the estate of Lord Montgomery of Ireland. His daughter, Jane, ran off and married the gardener, Stephen, much to her parents' dismay. Needless to say, it was best that they left town and relocated to the colonies. Sawmills of the Richardson family. 3 brothers married 3 sisters. James Richardson and Rachel Gott, sawmill on Richardson Brook, east shore of Somes Sound, head of the Sound. Stephen Richardson and Elizabeth Gott sawmill on West Shore of Bass Harbor. James Richardson Jr. sawmill, Waskett Cove, mouth of Somme Sound, east side. Thomas Richardson and Margaret Gott settled on the east shore of Bass Harbor, but did not run a sawmill. James and Rachel Gott Richardson settled on MDI in 1762. He was the son of Stephen and Jane. He married Rachel Gott and built a mill at Richardson Brook on the east side of Somme Sound. With the family's horticultural background, he was responsible for bringing many of the cultivated fruit trees and ornamental shrubs to Mount Desert. James Richardson's mill on the Richardson Brook outlet into Somme Sound. In the later 1800s, the mill was owned by the Higgins family. The outlet of Lower Hadlock Brook, east entrance to Somme Sound. James Richardson Jr. had a sawmill and a grist mill there, which was later owned by Davis and Spencer. James Jr.'s son, James III, drowned while sailing to East Bass Harbor to court his second cousin, Esther Richardson, daughter of Thomas Richardson. The first mill that was at this same location was run by Samuel Hadlock. He had the mill there in 1780s. It was probably on the same site as the James Richardson Jr. mill. Samuel was hung for murder in 1790. Here's a photo showing the Champlain Society men of Harvard at that Hadlock Brook Sawmill Site Dam, 1890. Jordan Pond Sawmill. Samuel Gilpatrick had a sawmill at the outlet of Jordan Pond and sold it to the Jordan brothers in 1841. Samuel then worked a mill at Hadlock Brook outlet into Waskett Cove, East Shore, Somme Sound. George Jordan and J.S. Jordan had a lumbering camp at Jordan Pond. A great fire in 1864 burned the timber on the slopes of Jordan, Penobscot Mountain, and Pematic Mountain, and scorched the ground, ending their business. Even Bartholomew Cadillac de Gregoire ran a mill. In 1688, Antoine de la Motte Cadillac was granted Mount Desert Island by the King of France. In 1787, Madame Marie-Thérèse Cadillac de Gregoire and her husband, Bartholomew, petitioned the Massachusetts court to grant them Mount Desert Island as heirs to her grandfather. She received half the island, accepting land already settled. Bartholomew de Gregoire set up a tied sawmill at the mouth of Northeast Creek around 1790. He died in 1810. William Blount arrived from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, prior to 1803, and set up 2 tied mills and a grist mill on the west side of Northeast Creek. He was a prominent resident and justice of the peace. Josiah Hadley had an up and down sawmill at Northeast Creek that made unplaned long timber and sheathing. And that is where the bridge is currently at Northeast Creek. Northeast Creek outlet, tied mills. Leland Cove. Ezra Leland came to MDI with his father, Amariah Leland, in 1769. Ezra ran a grist mill near the shore at Leland's Cove in the fall and spring. He was one of the best farmers in the north section of MDI and raised grain and corn. Between 1812 to 1815, island residents were terrorized by British privateers. Amariah Leland had to pay $500 to the British or risk having his vessel burned. Captain Eben Higgins and John Emery Mill at Stony Brook Heath, which is opposite Hamilton Pond. They made shingles, laths, clapboards, boxes, and were recorded in 1796. Here's an account by Albert Higgins. Robert Hamer was driving his horse homeward one spring evening at that time when the waters in the meadow above the old mill were very high. And just before reaching the mill location, Mr. Hamer suddenly heard a crashing sound and saw the whole structure, machinery and all, coming toward him. Had he been a moment earlier, he and his horse would have been killed. It seems that a great body of ice above the mill had broken loose and drifted into the supporting timber of the mill, toppling it over. Mill on Old Mill Brook and the Barcelona. Lemuel Jordan built a mill on the brook that empties into the head of the Barcelona. He lived near the brook and operated the mill a number of years, then moved to Salisbury Cove and built 2 or 3 vessels. He was married to a member of the Peach family, and the Peaches had a farm and were interested in lumber, and that would be located at the intersection of Millbrook Road and Old Norway Drive. The name Barcelona came from the name of a ship that Lemuel Jordan was building in Salisbury Cove called the Barcelona. Early Bar Harbor mills prior to 1796. We can see we've got the Stony Brook, Heath, Higgins, Hall's Cove, Samuel Hall, Duck Brook Outlet, Ezra Young, James Richardson's Mill, Cromwell Harbor was James Hamer, and then William Lynham at Schooner Head. Cromwell Harbor Mill, Bar Harbor. A mill at Cromwell Harbor was first constructed in 1768 by Nathan Jones for Francis Bernard, using the dismantled mill at Bass Harbor. In 1815, Captain James Hamer used the mill to manufacture shingles, laths, and smoked herring boxes. The first ice ever used by any of the summer hotels was harvested in Captain Hamer's mill pond. This pond also furnished a skating field for all the schoolboys at that period. Mills provided lumber resources to construct boarding houses as the local economy pivoted to tourism. Captain Hamer was an influential citizen of Eden, a justice of the peace, and a postmaster. He and his wife, Clarissa, were strong abolitionists. Captain Hamer turned to the new tourist economy and enlarged his house to a small hotel known as the Hamer House and took in boarders. Here's the Hamer House, corner of Cottage and Main Street, Bar Harbor. Bar Harbor Mills, by 1860, sketched by Albert Higgins, postmaster. At this point, Duck Brook, we have Thomas Waskett's grist mill and the Brewer sawmill. Number 2, Duck Brook, first with Brewer, then ending up in the Hamer family. Number 3 is Eddie's Brook sawmill, Jacob Summonsby. Number 4 is Cromwell Harbor, Captain James Hamer sawmill. Number 5, Schooner Head, William Lynham sawmill. Number 6 was the Kibo Brook, Enoch Leland sawmill. 7 was an Otter Creek outlet. Edward Brewer and his son Perry ran a sawmill. Albert Higgins' postmaster map, Bar Harbor, 1850s, sawmills, and more. A few interesting points here. Mount Desert Road was called Up the Road. Eagle Lake Road was called the Great Western Road to Southwest Harbor. A little mill of Jacob Summonsby at the Little Creek or Eddie's Brook above the bar. Mr. Summonsby was all around mechanic and in his day could saw, plane, and otherwise turn out as fine a ship or rowboat as anyone ever wished to lay eyes on. William Lynham Mill at Schooner Head. William Lynham's father was an officer in the French army. His mother was a Prussian. They moved from St. Augustine, Florida, about 1790 and settled at Schooner Head. Lynam mill with side wheel. The sawmill manufactured spools, blocks, and other products. William Lynam was injured while sawing, the effects from which he died April 14, 1857. The Lynam homestead with a pokey oil press was typical of multiple family industry activities. A turning point away from the lumber industry and towards tourism. In 1844, Thomas Cole, founder of the Hudson River School of Art, came to Mount Desert and stayed with the Lynam family. Lynam's homestead and mill became the home base of the Hudson River artists, including Frederick Church. Photo, Thomas Cole, the artist. Church brought his friends, the Charles Tracy family, including daughter Fanny Tracy, to visit the Lynams in 1850. John Lynam named his son after Frederick Church Lynam, known as Fred C. Lynam. Here is Fanny Tracy, the future Mrs. J.P. Morgan. Just in the nick of time, as most of the best trees had been harvested and mills became obsolete, artists and rusticators began arriving. Suddenly, mills became the artistic subject of a bucolic landscape. Hudson River artist William Hasseltine's sketch of the sluice at Lynam Sawmill. Sluice, directing water to the wheel on Lynam Sawmill near Schooner Head. Lynam Home with mill pond. John Lynam traded the sawmill operation for tourism, sold the homestead in 1862, which was then acquired by lawyer George S. Hale of Boston. And then John Lynam opened the Mount Desert Inn on Mount Desert Street in Bar Harbor to accommodate the new rusticators. Sawmill, unidentified location on MDI 1850 sketch by Frederick Church. Here it is, fully completed. Again, unknown location, possibly at the head of Somme Sound and Babson Creek. This was done by Frederick Edwin Church and in a private collection. Hall's Cove by Harrison Bird Brown, 1862. Samuel Hall had two sawmills operating here in 1796. Later, Master Edward Brewer ran a sawmill at Hall's Cove with his sons, Otis, Daniel, Porter, Perry, and Elmer. The mill turned out spool, blocks, staves. They built vessels and rowboats. Here's a close-up of the sawmill in Hall's Cove, 1862, by Harrison Bird Brown, and it was a steam sawmill when the Brewer family ran it. Mills were featured as romantic destination in guidebooks such as the 1867 Clara Barnes Martin Mount Desert on the coast of Maine. Martin described the hike up Keble Mountain, beginning at the charming old Mill in the Meadow, which belonged to Enoch Leland and was located on the present-day Keble Golf Course along Keble Brook. Enoch Leland Mill, used for sawing laths, shingles, clapboards, and joists. Eagle Lake. Clara Barnes Martin, in her guidebook of Mount Desert, referenced to this half-built mill as the mill on the Floss. Samuel Drake also mentioned it in his guidebook of 1875. The large old mill frame erected by Messrs. Goodwin and Severance, and which stood unused on the Great Pond stream near Eagle Lake. It was abandoned as a failure because there was not sufficient fall to the water. It was a very large two-story affair of hewn timber, pinned and bolted, but its walls or roof were never boarded in or any machinery ever installed in it. Duck Brook Outlet Mill, former Sonergy location, changed hands often. Ezra Young, in 1774, built the first sawmill in Eden at Duck Brook. He was the most influential man on the island and captain of the island militia. In 1775, Thomas Wascott and Job Stanwood had a lumber mill and a grist mill there as well. By 1843, John Hotchkiss, son-in-law of Thomas Wascott, had built a new mill at the same location. In 1848, the mill was purchased by Edward Brewer. In 1861, Calvin Salisbury bought the mill. And finally, in 1866, the mill was sold to Richard Hamer. Hamer Mill, Duckbrook Outlet, 1890s. The Hamers operated the mill until mid-1890s, the largest mill used for long and short lumber. Hamer's Sawmill, Duckbrook Outlet. In 1896, the Hamers were forced to close the Duckbrook Mill and move the saw machinery to West Street in Bar Harbor when the Bar Harbor Water Company dammed Duck Brook and stopped the flow to the mill. It's a steam sawmill. Edward Brewer settled at Hall's Cove prior to 1817. Master Brewer probably built more vessels than any other man in Eden. He was also concerned for many years in the lumber business, owning and operating sawmills on Hall's Cove Brook, on Duck Brook at its outlet, and midstream near the meadows, and also at Otter Creek. He built a sluice from their mills on Duck Brook near the meadows, down the brook to the salt water, in which they ran their lumber instead of hauling it. Mill on Duck Brook. Two views of one of the mills at Duck Brook. Two views of the mill on New Mill Meadow, Duck Brook, near the Duck Brook Carriage Road Bridge. Another view, New Mill Meadow, Sawmill, 1870s, near the present Duck Brook Carriage Road Bridge. In 1827, Edward Brewer and John Hotchkiss constructed the first mill in this area. Edward Brewer owned huge tracts of land on Cadillac and Door Mountains. Lumber was brought down to Otter Creek, where his son Perry ran a sawmill at the outlet of Otter Creek into Otter Cove. Sawmills gave way to the growth of summer estates. Robert Abbey bought the Hamer Mill property and built his estate and constructed a new dam and pond at the mill site. Old Millbrook Mill Pond, and here's Mill Pond transformed into Dr. Abbey's estate landscape, featuring swans. Brook End, Bar Harbor. West side of the island, mill at the Causeway, Southwest Harbor. Leonard Holmes and John Major Manchester III had a tide mill at Norwood Cove in 1826. The remnants of the dam became the base of the causeway. Ships were built on the shores of the mill pond at Norwood's Cove. A grist mill was also at Norwood's Cove. Norwood Cove, 1900, before the causeway construction by summer residents, showing the dam remnants, and then the start of the causeway construction. Nathan Clark kept a lumber camp on Western Mountain. Logs were sent down the mountain via a sluiceway, the origin of the current Sluiceway Trail. A crew stayed in the camp each winter, cutting logs and hauling them to Norwood's Cove, where they piled them on the ice. In the spring, the logs were floated to the mill, where they were sawed into lumber. Nathan's son, Henry, owned schooners employed in carrying the lumber to markets. Mill Field on the Western Mountain Road. It showed up as a shingle mill on the 1860 map and as Brown's Mill on this 1896 map. Pretty Marsh Mills. Number 1, Reuben Freeman, Mill Cove. Number 2, Richard Heath, Goose Marsh Pond. Number 3, Ephraim Prey, Pretty Marsh Harbor. Number 4, Stevens and Cooper, Steam Sawmill, on west shore of Long Pond. They made barrels and staves. Number 5, Merritt T. Ober, ran a steam sawmill near Goose Marsh Pond in Squid Cove, starting in 1915. Ephraim Prey's grist mill and sawmill, 1780s, at Pretty Marsh, shown on the 1808 Salem town map. Ephraim Prey died of smallpox shortly after building these mills. Stevens and Cooper steam sawmill, Long Pond, 1900, Bernard Mountain and Mansell Mountain in the background. Merritt Ober exemplified the successful and industrious businessman of the island. Like others, he used his lumber resources to enter the tourist industry. Born in 1864 on Bartlett's Island, he started a sawmill and hotel business in Sorrento. He lived with his family in Northeast Harbor, where he also ran a meat market and owned a large estate at Harborside that he rented to a wealthy summer family. Along with his son, Merritt Ober Jr., he produced laths and shingles at his mill in Pretty Marsh, using his schooner, the Frank Brainerd, to transport the shingles to various markets. The Merritt Ober schooner, the Frank Brainerd, in Pretty Marsh at Squid Cove. Dam remnants at Goose Marsh Pond, mill owned by Reuben Freeman and Richard Heath. William Freeman, descendant, followed other local businessmen when he traded mill operations and opened the popular tourist hotel, the Bayview House in Pretty Marsh, Maine. Sawmills in the Tremont area. Number 1, Frank Hodgson ran a grist mill on the east side of Hodgson Pond. Dam remnants are visible on that stream. Number 2, Heath Mill at midstream on the Seal Cove stream, grist mill. At the mouth of the Seal Cove Pond is where the carding mill was located. Number 4 was the Cushman steam sawmill, North Shore, Seal Cove. 5, Dodge Sawmill, next to the bridge at Bass Harbor Head, where the present-day Tremont Consolidated School is located. Number 6, Stephen Richardson Sawmill, Crockett Point in Bernard, 1763. The first mill built at Bass Harbor Marsh Outlet was constructed in 1764 by Nathan Jones for Francis Bernard, but was dismantled in 1768, and the machinery was moved to Cromwell Harbor in Bar Harbor. John S. Dodge, son of Ezra H. and Mary Richardson Dodge, daughter of James Richardson, ran a sawmill and a shingle mill at the outlet of Bass Harbor. When John died in 1854, he left his wife Elizabeth with much debt. The mill was sold to Eaton Clark. Dodge Homestead, the Bass Harbor Marsh Company barn for the hay, Bass Harbor Marsh. Eaton Clark ran the mill at Bass Harbor, but then ended the mill operation in order to form the Bass Harbor Marsh Company, along with other Tremont residents. The marsh was dammed and drained to create hayfields. Dam at Bass Harbor Creek Outlet for diking and draining the marsh, built in 1866 by the Bass Harbor Marsh Company at the location of the old Dodge Mill Dam. Logs under the Bass Harbor Marsh Bridge, 1920s. Logs were sent to the Bucksport Mill. Logs in the Bass Harbor Marsh heading to the bridge, 1920s. Logs carried to Bass Harbor Head shore, 1920s. Closer look at one family, Heath family of Seal Cove, from rags to riches to rags again, and an end to the water-powered mill. The Heath family were important community members throughout their 4 generations. The Heath family presence on MDI started with a William Heath, born in 1764 in Rockingham County, New Hampshire. He joined the New Hampshire Regiment in the Revolutionary War in 1779 at age 15, serving as a drum and fife boy. He was a soldier for 4 years and discharged in 1783. He went to Sedgwick, Maine, where other members of his community had settled. There he met and married Hannah Allen in 1786. They moved to Seal Cove, MDI, in 1789 and had 2 sons and 4 daughters. William bought land in 1789, which was owned by Abraham Reed, who had constructed a sawmill on the stream in 1785. Abraham sold the property to William, who went on to manage the mill, which was located about midstream. William Heath Sawmill, 1808, Salem Town Map. William Heath expanded his mill operations in 1810 when he purchased land from Richard Heath and set up a carding mill near the Seal Cove Pond. Heath Sawmill. In 1835, William's son, William Jr., bought the James Fly Sawmill at the bridge from the heirs of James Fly. The Heath Mills. There were first and second mills on Heath Stream, the outlet at Seal Cove Pond and emptying into Seal Cove, a convenient and safe harbor. Upon one, a sawmill, upon the other, a grist mill. The production of these mills can be shipped without the expense and inconvenience of trucking. Annual lumber produced about 250,000 board feet, several 100,000 staves. With proper machinery, much more could be done. Total fall, 40 feet in 1/4 of a mile. 2 dams. Mills work about 3/4 of the year, but with proper improvement could be run the whole season. Heath Stream is connected with 2 ponds. Formerly a carding and fulling mill on this stream, working successfully, but was worn out and suffered to go to ruin by the owner. A map by LaRue Spiker showing Seal Cove Pond, location of the grist mill, further down the sawmill near the bridge. Number 4 shows the shipyard. Here's the Heath grist mill stone located at the former Eugenia Catalina's house on Rummel Road. Here's remnants of the dam on Heath Stream, AKA Seal Cove Stream, and a park ranger. Construction of a new bridge obliterates the old mill site. You can see the path of the old bridge and compare it to the new bridge of today. 1928, Seal Cove Bridge built over the old Heath sawmill site. Ships built for William Heath Jr. allowed him to carry his mill products to markets. Heath operated the shipyard with John Fly at Seal Cove Outlet near the mill. William Heath Jr. was master of 3 and part owner of the following vessels: the schooner Orador, brig Atlas, brig Etrurian, schooner J.W. Heath, and the brig, the William Heath. Construction of the Etrurian brig at Seal Cove. 40 people contributed work or furnished materials for the vessel. Some were paid cash, but most were paid by credit at the Heath store. Work started on the vessel in late 1839, launched February 10, 1842. A letter from William Heath Jr. to his wife, Catherine, 1833. The letter illustrates the uncertainty in the shipping industry and the financial pressures. I do not know yet whether I shall go to New York or Boston, likely Boston. I shall be ready to sail in 3 days, as I have made but very little this trip, if I can find anything to do. I do not know as I shall come direct home, unless I can meet Captain Isaac Bartlett and let him take the brig. The demise of shipping with the development of railroads, the consequential end of shipbuilding, and the shuttering of sawmills. Taking a look over time at the number of vessels built on MDI. 1810 to 1819, we start with 20 vessels. By the next decade, we're up to 84 vessels. Even in 1850 to 1859, we still have a strong shipbuilding, 79 vessels. But by 1870 to 1879, we can see there's a drop in shipbuilding with only 26 vessels. And finally, in 1890 to 1899, only 2 vessels were built on MDI. The financial difficulties of William Heath Jr., costly ship accidents, plus the downturn in the shipping industry with the advent of rail transportation post-Civil War, forced William Heath Jr. to sell off his property holdings. 1856, William Heath Jr. sold one half of the sawmill, lath, stave, and shingle mill attached to the sawmill to Ezra Reed. 1857, William Heath Jr. took out a mortgage with the Hinckley Company of Bangor for 1/4 part of the mill operation. Also in 1857, William Heath Jr. sold for $1,000 his house lot and mill privilege to his son, William Webster Allen Heath. William Webster Allen Heath, he bought 1/2 the mill rights from his father. He was the last Heath to operate the sawmill. He sold the stumpage rights for the last bit of timber on the Heath Mountain lot and then closed the mill. He had held many town offices, served as chairman of the selectmen, deputy collector of customs. He was a respected high school teacher, educated as a civil engineer, and worked as a land surveyor. His children found limited economic opportunities. Fred was a painter for S.R. Tracy. Louisa was a grammar school teacher. Julian ran the store, and Victor farmed the homestead. None of his children married, and none of them had children. The Cushman Company of Ellsworth then continued to run a steam sawmill operation at the outlet of Seal Cove Stream through the early 1900s until the available timber from the Heath land ran out. Over time, vast harvesting of timber had cleared away much of the best timber, and new land opening up to timber harvest out west in the United States replaced the dwindling coastal Maine supply. Heath Homestead and store at the bridge, a changing local economy, and the Depression. In Seal Cove, the mill industry did not transform into the tourist industry as it did in other areas of the island. With the phasing out of traditional means of economic growth, families struggled for cash. The inability to pay property taxes caused many families in Tremont to lose their land. In 1927, Heath family lost the family homestead by a tax lien. 1938, the Heath family sold land to Acadia National Park and bought back the homestead from the town. 1944, another lien was placed on the Heath homestead for failure to pay town tax. The property was auctioned, and Eugenia Carolinas, a summer resident, purchased the home. The deed from the town of Tremont stipulated that she would be obliged to give life tenancy to the Heath family. The last Heath, Victor, died in 1962. George Dorr, Charles Elliott, founders of the Hancock County Trustees of Public Reservation and the conservation movement. New technology in the early 1900s allowed sawmills to shift away from water power and turn to diesel power. Portable sawmills made it easier to operate in sections of mountains formerly difficult to access. George Dorr said, if you want to know what spurred the conservation movement on MDI, it was the invention of the portable sawmill. The harvesting of trees on vistas alarmed summer residents and created an urgency to conserve the land. Old logging roads became hiking trails for the developing Acadia National Park. Haynes Sawmill, 1974. Several small sawmills run with diesel continued on the island. In 1974, Steve Haynes' father, Blaine, had a mill on the Beach Hill Crossroad. He used his sawmill that Acadia National Park had purchased from North Carolina to help clean up the trees following the fire of 47. Steve recalls the Allen sawmill as well, with huge piles of sawdust, and it was located at the head of Somes Sound at the present MDI campground. A special thanks to the following historians, especially Eben Hamer, who recorded island history so that we could learn about the life and accomplishments of our amazing island settlers, as well as Nellie Carroll Thornton for the West Side, author of Traditions and Records. She's at the site of the Causeway Dam. Ralph Stanley of Southwest Harbor, Virginia Somes Sanderson for her book, The Living Past and the History of Somesville. Albert Higgins, Robert Lindsay Smallage of Northeast Harbor, and LaRue Spiker. And that concludes our program on Mills of MDI. Thank you so much for listening. Are there any questions, or are you all too stunned?
Why was it the Barcelona?
Well, my understanding from Eben Hamer's notes, if you haven't read that manuscript, it's a must read. Lemuel Jordan built ships, and one of the ships was called the Barcelona. And he was running that sawmill, and it was to produce lumber to build that ship, the Barcelona. That was his account. Okay.
And online, we have a question from Maureen, who is interested about the mills. What kind of traces are there on the island today, and especially the Lineham Mill on Schooner Head?
There are remnants of stonework if you are on Schooner Head Road, and it's now privately owned. And depending on how bold you want to be, you could step in and see some of the stonework, and it will match the photo of the Lineham sawmill with that side wheel. So she should be able to see stonework. Yeah.
Are there any other mills, remnants?
Yeah, there's remnants over a Northeast Creek, way out on, it was a tie sawmill, and it's on the west side, and you can see stonework there. You can see stonework at the Seal Cove Stream, midstream. There's still stonework for the grist mill. There's Pretty Marsh at Goose Marsh Pond. You can see that dam at low tide.
Is there anything at Carmel Harbor?
No, not that I could find.
And one follow-up, are there any mills within the current bounds of Acadia National Park?
Well, I'll pass that question to Gary Stefla. Do you have any idea?
You could show your map with 38 green dots on it, and we can make a guess.
Well,
Outlet of Otter Creek, probably outside the park. Eagle Lake, Duck Brook, all the mills along
yeah, of
there
course, all
will
the
be
Duck
there.
Brook.
Yep.
Yeah, the Duck Brook carriage road. You can scramble over there and see stonework.
Tiny bit of stonework along the stream.
Oh, you can also see a lot of stonework at the outlet of Richardson Brook. Do you guys know where that is? Okay. East Shore. I'll show you after.
Okay.
At Hodgson, the Hodgson Mill.
The Hodgson Mill, that's the east side of Hodgson Pond. You have to go up the stream. It's midway, and you can find stonework at the top there.
So, thank you.
Oh, you're-
Um,
Sorry about all the glitches.
You use church and some of his artwork, but you don't use what I think is his most achieved portrait, a landscape of a mill.
Mhm.
I think it's 1857. And it's really quite extraordinary. You see where the timber was taken. You see a working mill, you see 2 or 3 teams of oxen going. So it's one of his most achieved works. As far as I've been able to discover, no, there's no definitive statement of where it is, but I believe it's Skipper's book, which would make sense in terms of the relationship with Somerville, the development of that economy by the 1850s.
Yeah, well, that would be great if you would share it. I do,
Yeah.
actually, yeah. And I did have one sketch, not a finished product, of the Halls Cove sawmill that he did.
In 1867, you said Clara Barnes Martin wrote a guidebook of MDI, but I didn't get the name of that guidebook.
On the coast of Mount Desert.
Okay,
Yeah. Something like that.
great, thank you.
But it's on the slide.
In connection with all these mills, a great deal of trees were taken down. You see these old pictures and you see fields, where today you see forests.
Right.
So in connection with looking into this, did you see a map or see information about like how much woods was deforested and then presumably came back? Did you see information about this, or was it hard to find anything like that?
Oh, no, it was pretty clear cut. So when they were cutting trees in order to mill them and use them locally, so this is a product, a resource meant to be milled and then used for some other purpose. They were fine. They were taking out just enough. And then they changed and they started to log not as a product for the mill, but just as a firewood to send down to limestone, I believe. They had limestone. Oh, Rockland. Okay. So this is what I read, was that was the tipping point. When they started harvesting to use that product as material for running the kilns, thank you. That's what actually really deforested the area. Yep.
I have a diary of a great grandfather, and he and his father cut 200 cords of wood one winter and took to the railroads in Boston. I can't give you the year, but I'd suggest it was in the late 1840s.
Did they have their own ships?
Yes.
Well, everybody apparently was jumping on and off ships, and it was a dicey proposition. They really didn't have the knowledge for the best navigation practices. A lot of people lost their lives in that industry. But oftentimes I'll hear people and they'll say, oh, fishing was the industry here. And it's like, not really, actually. It was shipbuilding and shipping. That's what really ran the economy here.
Down to Boston.
Yeah.
And Cobbles. Yes, and Cobbles.
Will your illustrations also be available if we want to re-listen to your lecture?
Yeah, so everything has been recorded, including all the glitches.
Right, I have a few online questions just to pepper you with. So we've got from Catherine. She wonders who was the Brown of Brown's Mill.
I don't know.
Okay, thank you. And we also have a question from Jim. He's wondering if Albert Higgins is the man who built Higgins Terrace in Bar Harbor. It was built by Albert L. Higgins around 1903.
Probably. A.L. Higgins was a great resource for this talk. He writes a lot of articles. If you're interested in the history of MDI, you must all go to the History Trust. It's an online portal that will allow you access to the newspaper archives. And then you're down the rabbit hole. And you'll forget to make supper.
And one last one, from Brett. Did you find any reference to fish passage for migratory fish at any of the older mills?
No, is the short answer. Did you know that they made, like the CCC's created these fish ladders to help fish make their way up in some sound, right? To make their way up to Somes Pond. Certainly that's what's going on over in the Seal Cove stream. I think it's Maine Coast Heritage Trust that's building fish ladders there. I know the CCC also built fish ladders on the Duckbrook stream, in between the Duckbrook Carriage Road Bridge and the outlet. So there are definitely, but I don't know that people of that time, while running their sawmills, made allowances to letting fish get by. I don't know that. Yep.
There used to be a model of the Sonesville mills at the Historical Society.
Oh, cool.
Is that still around?
I don't know.
That was my family.
Oh, well, let's track it down.
It was at the old yellow schoolhouse the last time I saw it.
I don't believe, it may be in our holdings, but we don't have that.
Well, thank you guys for coming out. That was great.